Well, speaking of that, let's talk a little bit about Trump's legal. We gotta stop calling them woes. I'm so tired of seeing people say Trump's legal woes. He does not see them as woes. They are yays. So let's talk about the week in Trump's time in court. He was in two
Can I ask you?
courtrooms. One in
Can I
DC.
ask you about your complaint
yeah.
there, just real quickly?
Yeah.
Because I take your point about the politics entirely, right? Could you say that his legal challenges are political yays, but they may still get proved to be legal woes? No.
How so?
He could
Jail?
be found guilty of
Not anytime soon. Right? That
okay,
March trial date's been blown to
yeah,
hell.
but my question was about the future, right? So like you think
Well,
like
but there's so many things that can happen between now and the future. So
I
all of his
understand that.
Republican rivals have said they would pardon him. If he wins, obviously he's in no legal jeopardy for the time that he's in office at minimum and probably thereafter. So yeah, I mean, I'm not saying there's not some jeopardy in the future in different versions of it, but like a year's a long way off.
Okay. All right. I mean, we'll let the discussion flow, and we'll circle back to some of these points.
Okay, so Donald Trump shows up in a DC courtroom where the DC Circuit's hearing his appeal about whether he has absolute immunity from criminal prosecution after leaving office. His lawyer in that case, and we talked about it extensively on a little podcast we like to call the Flagship Advisory Opinions. His lawyer was forced to concede that under his theory of the Constitution, a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, but then left office before being convicted in a Senate impeachment trial, could never be charged with a crime thereafter. Donald Trump sitting in the audience for that. Again, he doesn't have to be there. In fact, most people don't go to their circuit appellate arguments. So unusual for a client to be there in that case. Then in his civil fraud trial in New York, there had been rumors that somehow he was going to give the closing statement, which is insane. This isn't a criminal trial. You don't get to represent yourself. That's not how this works. The judge said no to that. But never to be deterred, Donald Trump stood up anyway and started speaking. The judge at one point saying, counselor, control your client, which you really only hear on television legal drama. So congrats to everyone involved in that nonsense. I guess this almost falls as a not worth your time in the sense of, did we learn anything? Is anything new? Does anything matter? Steve?
I don't know. I don't think it does. I haven't followed this at all.
Yeah,
so that actually tells us something, right? Like that's relevant to me.
I get all of my information on what's happening with Trump's trials because it's so confusing and hard to keep track of from the collision. So if things have been covered in the collision at some length, then I understand them, and if things haven't, then I basically don't. That's where I am on this.
Aw, thanks for the plug, Steve.
It's good.
So
it's really good. Thanks to Mike Warren.
This is less on the news kind of things that we learn thing, and more about. But we did learn how sometimes the law can be an ass. It was a nice reminder when you find the legal counsel for a past president of the United States and someone who has at this stage something just around a 50%, maybe a 45% chance of being the next president of the United States, when that person's lawyer is in court sounding like Claudine Gay, saying it depends on the context, in effect, about whether or not the president can order the assassination of his political opponents, we are in some weird ass territory, right? And like the idea that everyone thinks this is just sort of this amusing thing. And I get it. Appeals courts are where hypotheticals, that is there, the Elysium fields of hypotheticals are appeals court.
Yeah, to be clear, it's not like he walked in and said, let me tell you what presidents can do in my world.
Right. But given the flow of the argument and the conversation in that room, it was not in and of itself an unreasonable question of the lawyer. And the lawyer didn't respond by saying, whoa, 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 we're getting way ahead of ourselves here. Under no circumstances could the president order SEAL Team 6 to murder his opponent and get away with it. Instead, he was like, well, if he's not impeached and removed, then he cannot be prosecuted for the political assassination of his opponents. That's his position. That's crazy town. That's bananas that this is considered a normal conversation to be had about the president of the United States. And I get it. Lawyers do this, but like, come on.
By the way, the fun result of that, Donald Trump is not currently president. So if he ordered, a hit on Joe Biden, he would be arrested and charged with a crime. But according to his own theory, Joe Biden can kill him with impunity.
So I have a friend of mine who's a lawyer at my cigar shop, and he said, okay, well, here you go. Biden should declare that contingent upon the ruling of the appeals court, there's a standing order that if the court approves this, SEAL Team 6 will murder Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. And just see what Trump says. Does Trump think that's okay? Well, that's out of my hands. He's got every right to do it. He's the president.
Laughing because otherwise I'd be crying. We almost made it to the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Constitution. Of not the U.S. Constitution. We're actually still a little ways away from that. Of just declaring independence, which somehow is notable in this regard.
Yeah. I mean, we can laugh about this now because these are hypotheticals, and it seems they're crazy. Like the way Jonah framed the argument, I think is correct, and it's insane. I think one of the reasons that we had this prolonged spasm of national discussion on Trump as a dictator is because of stuff like this, right? I mean, we all would love to believe that if he were in office, his lawyers and people around him and others would say, oh, that's crazy, Mr. President. But you push his logic on some of these things to the endpoints, and these are the arguments you're left with. And I think it's for me, it's one of the reasons that I don't think we're alarmed enough about the possibility of another Trump term, because these kind of crazy hypotheticals that we can all laugh about, the president could be seriously wanting to make them policy. I think it would be great if he has people who tell him, Mr. President, you can't do that. I have a lot less confidence that we would have people around him saying that in a second Trump presidency than we did in the first one.
Well, also there's the broader thing, like the Biden campaign going quote unquote full Hitler, right? You're gonna have this national conversation, as we were supposed to call these things, about whether or not the president can be a dictator, what it means to be a dictator, whether a president can murder people, whether he's above the law, all of these really high-minded civic Republican conversations, right? They're going to go on. Biden is going to insist that Donald Trump would do all of these terrible things. If Trump then gets elected, Trump can plausibly say, hey, America, you were warned. We told you. You're like, I didn't tell you. Joe Biden told you I was going to do this stuff, and I still got elected. So, Joe Biden, please report to Gitmo by tomorrow morning, or we're going to come get you, or whatever it is. But rhetoric matters and how we talk about things. And if you tell people over and over again that this guy is going to be a monster and a dictator and a tyrant and all these kinds of things, and then the American people elect them anyway, it gives a certain. It moves the Overton window in ways that it shouldn't be moved.
But it's not reason to avoid making those arguments if it's what you truly believe, right? I mean, I think
no, but I've
got plenty of problems with Joe Biden as both a president and a candidate. But I think some of the warnings he's giving about what Trump would likely do are actually true. I mean, I think he's right.
My point is you should be careful about how you do it, and you shouldn't do it cheaply, right? And
I think that's right. I mean, you had a good. Was it a G file or a column about this? It was a G file, Wednesday G file. Everybody should go look at it. We'll put it in the show notes. It's definitely worth reading. I think that the advice that you're giving, at least the way I read it, was more appropriate to 1999 Democrats than it is now,
Sure.
who were saying
Yeah,
Bush is
yeah.
Hitler and all that. I think lessens the sense of alarm when you say it about somebody like Donald Trump, who I do think actually is a risk of some of this. I mean, it's not hypothetical. We don't need to speculate that he's a risk. We saw him try to steal an election. We saw him be part of a
Steve,
violent uprising. I mean,
you
it's
see
not
why
theoretical.
people. Well, first of all, the argument is he wasn't part of the violent uprising.
Yeah, the argument's wrong. He
okay,
was
but
part
you
of
see
the
why people
violent
think that
uprising.
actually, like you've just moved over to the side of the people who thought that George W. Bush was in fact a real threat, right? That it's not that the threat's different; it's that you've moved over and that they see it as exactly the same.
Yeah, well, that's crazy, if I can just be that blunt about it. It's not the case that George W. Bush was Hitler and that he was doing all of these, extra constitutional things. Sure, we can have a debate about enhanced interrogation or torture or whatever you want to call it. Make that argument. He wasn't doing the kinds of things that we've seen Donald Trump do, like trying to steal an election, and that we've had Donald Trump campaign on. I think that's the other difference. And this is to Jonah's point. I mean, I think there's risks in Joe Biden building a campaign around Trump being a threat to democracy. I think it's sort of obvious to see why he would do it, because I think they believe that it worked in 2022. They believe that it's an argument that resonates not only with the Democratic base, which might not be enthusiastic about a Joe Biden candidacy, but also the kinds of independents and disaffected Republicans who could produce a victory for Joe Biden in November. So it's obvious to see why they do it. I think you're right that he ought to be somewhat cautious about it, because you say it too often and people start to just tune you out, number one. And number two, it is the case that it's the Biden DOJ that's going after Trump on some of these things. Now, I happen to think they're very justified, both on stolen election grounds and on classified document case. But it does carry some risk. I don't think that that's a reason not to make the argument, because I think the threat from Trump is real.
Hey, Sarah, can I just ask you a basic legal question for like normal humans?
Yes.
Can the president give an illegal order?
Flesh out what you mean by that. Like, what do you mean, can he? Like, is it an order if the president gives it and it's illegal? I guess.
Is it illegal if the president orders it?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
I see your
so
point. Yeah. Can an order be illegal? Yeah.
Right, from the president.
For sure.
Right. And so it's the illegality of the order. Does it only apply to the people he's ordering, or does it apply to him giving it? Right. So, like, an officer is supposed to refuse an illegal order, right?
Correct.
But a commanding officer or commander in chief is supposed to not give illegal orders.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, like, forget assassinate Joe Biden. Let's do something that everyone could agree was bad. Because apparently some people don't think that's necessarily too bad.
Yeah, so it would be illegal for the president to order it. The question is, what's the punishment for it? And the Trump lawyer would argue the punishment is impeachment. Then, if the Senate agrees that it was a high crime and misdemeanor, then an Article 3 court can determine that it was also a high crime and misdemeanor, including criminal punishment. But we have this higher bar for presidents to have basically a body of their peers judge them first.
Right. So, but whenever presidents get impeached, the impeachers say impeachment's not a punishment. All you TV lawyers
Correct.
say it's not a criminal procedure.
Correct.
And which is why among the infuriating
things, but it's almost like before you can bring the criminal process, you have to. Again, I'm using Trump's.
You have to get him out of the office,
lawyers.
Right?
You have to get him out of the office, but you also, his argument is, everyone agrees, every side agrees that you cannot charge a president while in office.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that there's arguments that that's wrong, but every side in this oral argument agreed with that. But the Trump attorney argument is that you cannot simply go straight into a criminal process against a former president for an official act he took while president, that in fact the Senate has to first also agree that it was a crime, basically. The House and Senate.
And so Trump's lawyers back in the day when he was impeached twice,
right,
particularly the second time,
said
they said yeah, right. So that's clear, right? Is that
Yeah.
they said, and so what is, because I thought there were better hypotheticals to ask of Trump's lawyers, like, what if you murder Taylor Swift, right? Something everyone can agree is bad, and then resign, or murder her
Right.
in the last week of your presidency before Congress has time to reconvene. Because the old argument was you can't impeach someone at the end of the calendar of his presidency because you can't impeach someone who's out of office, which was actually like Mitch McConnell's position, and he was very wrong about that, I would argue.
Yeah, so
For
Trump's lawyer
precisely
would
these
say
sorts
that,
of reasons.
yeah, that you can impeach someone at any point after they've left office, because one of the things they said is, what if someone is impeached and even convicted for A, and then it comes out later that they actually also did B? Can we charge them with crime B? They were impeached and convicted. And the answer was no, you have to be impeached and convicted for the thing that you're being criminally charged with. So you could impeach someone again 10 years later, potentially 50 years later if you wanted to somehow. So yeah, they changed their mind on when impeachment can happen, and they changed their mind on the order of operations, whether it's crime first, then impeachment, etc.
So,
But I will say that I think this argument is much more constitutionally sound than the arguments they were making around the impeachment, which were banana town, made no sense, had no bearing within constitutional structure. I still think this one's incorrect, but at least I can make this argument for you with a straight face as to why it works and how it works.
So, but all right, so the part that you think is constitutionally defensible and all that, tell me how, because I hear this in impeachments all the time, and I hear this in political scandals all the time about presidents. The president is not above the law, but he's not below the law. And now you're saying, or they're saying, that there is a constitutionally necessary political step that will make it very difficult to charge a president with a capital crime. That seems to me that's two-tier justice. That means that the president is, in fact, maybe not completely above the law, but above everybody else when it comes to the application of justice.
Sure, for official acts. But we have that already. Judges have absolute immunity. Legislators often have absolute immunity. Governors have absolute immunity over all sorts of things. In fact, the lawyers for the Department of Justice didn't argue that a president doesn't have huge swaths of immunity for official acts while president. The example of, could Barack Obama be charged with capital murder for killing Americans in a drone strike? He said, no, he cannot be charged. Not simply he cannot be found guilty, but rather he does have immunity from those charges. So again, actually, everyone agrees that presidents are quote unquote above the law for something, same as all sorts of other government officials when they're acting as that government official with a discretionary something within their discretion.
There's some bootstrapping or question begging here insofar as we're all stipulating, including the people who asked the hypothetical, so it's not fair to sort of hold this against them. They stipulated that it was a official act. It is not established that what Trump did on January 6th was an official act, right? I mean, I know they claim it, but that doesn't mean it's true.
They actually weren't looking at January 6th during this argument.
Whatever, right.
Yeah, they were talking about the DOJ part, where Trump is discussing whether to replace his attorney general with a different attorney general who will do the things that he wants. It's hard to argue that's not an official act. That's appointments clause stuff,
that's fair.
Right? Like that's
a good clarification.
Pretty heartland official act.
Yeah. Okay. Fair.
As ordering a drone strike would be, even if the drone strike is illegal itself, ordering a drone strike would be an official act. It's why the SEAL Team 6 example wasn't Donald Trump can go shoot someone on Fifth Avenue. Donald Trump gives an order to SEAL Team 6, that's an official act. That order is illegal, that's where then the crime is. So, but you need both in order to come into our world of hypotheticals.
The reason I got this wrong was because I saw that Trump has claimed, it was a Politico piece about this morning, Trump is claiming that that his actions on January 6th were official acts because the campaign was long over, right? That was his phrase on some Truth Social post or something.
Yeah.
That the campaigning was long over. So that's why I thought they were trying to claim that this was an official act, and that's why I thought it was relevant. Right. Okay.
They will, but if basically there's a world in which if Jack Smith's team wins, the next step is to now litigate what's an official act and what's not. And
Okay.
it gets really messy, right? Because the line might be between official act and not official act. I actually don't think it will be, because I think under Marbury versus Madison and a bunch of other precedents, it's actually between, like, we sort of assume everything's official because we don't want courts necessarily looking into those sort of details. But what was discretionary and what was ministerial, meaning required. And that was why one of the questions at the oral argument was, if the president's, the very beginning of Article 2 says, take care that the laws be faithfully executed, isn't that ministerial? Meaning, aren't you required then to abide by all the laws, which would sort of get rid of the distinction between ministerial and discretionary if all of a sudden that one line means that nothing is within your discretion as president. Of course it is.